Born Joan Alexandra Malinsky in 1933, Joan Rivers grew up with no illusions of wealth and had more modest roots than you'd ever guess from the glittering caverns she'd one day inhabit. Her father was a doctor who built a respectable life for his family in Brooklyn and later in Larchmont, New York. As a child, Joan exhibited an obsession with aesthetics. She would rearrange the contents of her family's living room, positioning porcelain figurines, adjusting table linens until they looked just right, as her mother would say with a half laugh. But there was a deeper subtext to her fussing. Even then, she seemed to sense that physical space could shape emotional states. If a room's angles, colors, and furniture were harmonious, then maybe life too could feel more secure. It's this careful, almost surgical attention to detail that would eventually define her approach to real estate. In each of her homes, lavish or understated, one finds an echo of a little girl rearranging figurines to impose some semblance of order on a sometimes chaotic world. Yes, she was comedic dynamite, bold, unfiltered, unstoppable. But inside, she nurtured insecurities about acceptance, about age, about worth. And that interior swirl of anxieties found expression in the flamboyant rooms she shaped for herself. Her comedic stardom soared in the 1960s and 70s. But even before her big break, Joan made small real estate moves with unbridled excitement. She was a newlywed to the producer Edgar Rosenberg in the mid-1960s, when they purchased a modest apartment in Greenwich Village. They weren't flush with money yet, so it wasn't dripping in gold or festooned with priceless antiques. But the bohemian charm suited her comedic ambition. She found something thrilling in village life, the swirl of intellectual energy, the open mic nights at clubs, the gritty glamour. Over the years, she often referred to that early apartment as a place of scrappy dreams. She'd tape jokes to the refrigerator door, test punchlines on the stoop, and look out over city rooftops, wondering if success was just around the corner. Yet the modest years gave way to unstoppable success. By the 1980s, the Tonight Show guest host had soared to comedic superstardom, and she discovered a new love, collecting. It began with small items, porcelain pugs, ornate picture frames, crystal decanters, anything that sparkled or exuded an air of old-world grandeur. After her first major contract, she bought a grand apartment on Park Avenue in New York City. Grand is an understatement, perhaps. Long corridors were lined with mirrors to magnify the sense of vastness. Joan handpicked the wallpaper with European artisans, layering her new home in intricate designs reminiscent of Versailles. Yet she soon found Park Avenue too staid, too polished in a cookie-cutter way. She described it as a well-bred society matron who won't let her hair down. And Joan, unstoppable comedic rebel that she was, wanted something truly spectacular, a statement. That's when, in the mid-1980s, she stumbled onto a neo-French classic-style mansion on the Upper East Side, just a stroll from Central Park, on East 62nd Street. Once the property of a notable Gilded Age family, the building had soared through the decades, hosting everything from dashing society figures to rumored starlets and maverick artists in transition. Its bones were regal, with a sweeping marble staircase, soaring ceilings, and an unmistakable feeling of stepping into another era. Many potential buyers found it too large or too eccentric. Joan's eyes sparkled the moment she walked in. She saw potential for grandeur, for comedic drama, and for the ultimate expression of her younger self's craving for an aesthetically perfect stage. And so began the meticulously curated tapestry that she would call home. She hired top interior designers, but always with her own comedic flair. She had an eye for the whimsical. A life-size painting of Marie Antoinette might greet you in the parlor. And just above it, a small comedic placard with one of Joan's self-deprecating quips. She insisted on a color palette that exuded wealth, golden tones, pastel blues, and an abundance of cream furniture, the color of money, as she joked. One might assume it was all about flaunting success, but to Joan, it was a cocoon, a place where every object and design detail reaffirmed that she was no longer that insecure kid from Brooklyn who didn't fit the mold. Her sense of humor infiltrated the design in more subtle ways. An elegant tapestry displayed in the grand salon, for instance, depicted elaborate aristocratic figures in a pastoral scene. If you lifted it, so the story goes, you'd find a hidden alcove stuffed with comedic scripts, half-written jokes, and notes scribbled at 3 a.m. She joked that if an intruder ever broke in, they'd have to face the possibility of comedic one-liners as their only loot. Yet under the jokes lay a genuine fear of losing her comedic edge. The house served as a vault not just for her antiques, but also for her comedic lifeblood, her sense of identity. It's important to note that the building had its own mystique. Joan publicly claimed the place was haunted by a previous resident, a Gilded Age socialite she called Mrs. Spencer. For a time, Joan said inexplicable noises and strange flickers of light would dance across the corridors at night. In a typical Rivers spin, she'd say in interviews, "If the ghost wants to live rent-free, she better laugh at my jokes." But privately, she took the haunting more seriously. She once confided to a friend that she felt a kinship with the spirit, imagining her as another determined, misunderstood woman who refused to leave center stage. It was rumored that after repeated flickering lights and mysterious footsteps, Joan sought the help of a local clairvoyant. Whether that story is true remains open to debate, but the rumored presence of this ghost seemed to intrigue her more than terrify her. She thrived on the drama, turning the mansion's silent halls into a comedic battleground between the old Gilded Age and her own unstoppable brand of modern wit. During the early 1990s, amid some rocky personal times, financial struggles, the tragic loss of her husband and career hurdles, Joan felt the weight of that palatial penthouse. At times, its grandeur felt mocking. So much space, so many memories, so many responsibilities. The house needed constant upkeep. Specialists for the antiques, reupholsterers for the plush chairs, carpenters to restore ornate moldings. So she retreated to her second home in Connecticut, a country farmhouse that couldn't have been more different from the Manhattan Palace if it tried. There, she swapped marbled foyers for a cozy front porch and gilded candelabras for vintage lanterns. The Connecticut farmhouse, nestled off a winding rural road, had a dusty green exterior and a wrap-around porch with wooden rocking chairs. Gone were the elaborate tapestries. Instead, simple floral curtains framed the windows, letting in the rolling farmland vistas. Here, she insisted on no formal living room, rather a snug, lived-in space. There were personal touches everywhere. Framed photos of her daughter Melissa through the years, an old upright piano she claimed no one in the family knew how to play, and a collection of crocheted blankets that smelled faintly of lavender sachets. In many ways, the farmhouse was her retreat from the comedic gladiator ring that was show business. She'd let her hair down, slip on comfortable slippers, and sip tea while rifling through gossip magazines or jotting down new comedic angles in a battered notebook. If the Manhattan penthouse was her war room, the Connecticut farmhouse was her sanctuary. Where the penthouse soared with marble columns and gilded paneling, the farmhouse breathed with the earthy smell of worn wood floors, the hum of distant crickets, and the faint hush of a woman exhausted from entertaining the world. But let's step back to 1988 for a moment. In the aftermath of her husband Edgar Rosenberg's death, Joan faced an emotional cataclysm. She was left to piece together her finances, her career, and the well-being of her daughter. Suddenly, her lavish real estate holdings seemed like potential burdens. Yet ironically, it was also the moment she decided to put more personal touches into the Manhattan penthouse. As if the more pain she felt, the more determined she became to transform her surroundings into a living dreamscape. She famously collaborated with Robert Stark, a designer known for mixing classic European elegance with a dash of irreverence. They replaced a once somber library with a sunshine yellow salon, complete with enormous windows that let in the morning light, rare in the Upper East Side's cluster of tall buildings. Joan wanted the rays to spill across the floor at dawn. She said it gave her hope to see the day start fresh, a small victory against lingering depression. In place of a silent reading room, the salon became a cheerful gathering spot. Friends like Kathy Griffin, Sarah Silverman, and other comedic colleagues would drop by for coffee, bagels, and, inevitably, a flurry of hilarious banter. But here's the twist few realized. Those boisterous gatherings masked a deep vulnerability. Joan often felt she had to keep the show going, even at home. Cameras were always near. Interviewers asked for tours. And she, the unstoppable comedic force, insisted on being on. Yet if you caught her in a quiet moment, maybe just after the guests left or before her staff arrived in the morning, you might find her pausing in front of a gilded mirror, staring at her reflection, or kneeling on a velvet cushion in front of an antique fireplace, watching embers adretin fade. She was searching for the peace she never fully found under the glare of stage lights. It's one reason she also acquired a small condo in Los Angeles for periods of TV work, award shows, guest appearances, pilot seasons. The LA spot was small by her standards, but it overlooked a scenic stretch near the Hollywood Hills. Think airy floor-to-ceiling windows, modern lines, and a neutral color palette. Nothing like her Manhattan kingdom. This was the Joan who was constantly evolving, excited by new forms of design. She invited a contemporary designer, Adam Prince, to shape the place. Clean lines dominated, with white walls offset by black and white photography prints, many featuring iconic Hollywood stars. When asked why she avoided ornate details in LA, she quipped, "In Hollywood, I prefer to be the one wearing the gaudy jewelry. The house can stay calm while I do the talking." This LA home saw more comedic brainstorming than anything else. She occasionally threw small parties. Fellow comics, up-and-coming actors, producers. The rumor mill suggests that behind a sliding bookshelf was a cramped office. Hardly anyone knew it existed, because it was so minimal you might miss the door. That little hidden space was said to hold her unfiltered comedic diaries, scribbled at 2 a.m., as well as gift boxes full of the quirky gag items she'd send to friends. She valued secrecy in her creative process. She once told a close acquaintance, "The moment you let everyone peek behind the curtain, the illusions fade, and so does the comedy." So we see across these different addresses a pattern emerges. The Manhattan penthouse was her flamboyant stage, the Connecticut farmhouse her pastoral retreat, and the LA condo her discreet, creative bubble. Each space echoed a different facet of her personality. Indeed, in Manhattan, she indulged in excess. She hosted benefits for charities in rooms that might have felt like a cameo in Dangerous Liaison. Guests sipped champagne from crystal flutes while gliding across Persian rugs. In the Connecticut farmhouse, she might just as likely offer you a glass of lemonade and lead you on a walk to see her flower beds, proudly pointing out a newly bloomed rose. And in Los Angeles, she maintained an aura of sleek professional drive, her comedic empire in microcosm. Of course, people gossip about Joan's iconic penthouse. Did she really keep a menagerie of porcelain animals, each with its own comedic name? Supposedly, yes. Stories persist that she had a porcelain dog named Johnny, after Johnny Carson, reflecting her complicated relationship with the late-night king. A plush velvet, fainting couch in one upstairs corner was rumored to be the spot where she'd phone her daughter, Melissa, late at night, dispensing comedic advice and motherly affection in equal measure. Her closest friends joked that the penthouse was a labyrinth of comedic Easter eggs. Everywhere you looked, there was some witty nod or hidden detail that spoke to Joan's irrepressible spirit. One story that rarely surfaces is the rumor that she had a hidden vault in that penthouse. Now, the rumor goes that it wasn't just for jewels, though unquestionably, she owned a formidable collection. The vault, some say, also protected diaries she'd kept since her teenage years. She guarded them zealously. A staff member once let slip that if you pressed a certain gold cherub in the living room, it triggered a latch to open behind a tapestry. Inside that hidden closet was a thick steel door, behind which lay her most vulnerable reflections, pages of heartbreak, comedic insights, and secrets that she never dared to share. Whether that staff member's story was real or a bit of rumor amplified by New York tabloids, no one can fully confirm. But the idea that behind her lavish comedic facade was a literal fortress of vulnerability resonates with what we know of her. Joan's devotion to her daughter was also evident in the house. She installed a plush guest suite specifically designed for Melissa, decorated in a style reminiscent of an English country cottage. She wanted Melissa to feel she was returning not to a showplace, but to a warm, maternal nest. Yet the suite contained comedic relics too, a framed playbill from one of Melissa's early ventures into the entertainment world, witty notes pinned to a corkboard telling her to shut the door if you bring home a date, some things a mother needn't see. Even in her protective maternal role, she carried that comedic stance. Those who visited the penthouse often left with a sense of awe. Kathy Griffin once described it as the only place in the city where you can walk into the 18th century, hear a 20th century mouth, and have a 21st century comedic breakdown all at once. And that's precisely it. Joan's home was not a static museum. It was a living stage where the centuries collided, where Baroque furniture met snappy one-liners, and where a portrait of a French court lady coexisted with a comedic placard about aging. Another lesser-known anecdote involves a party she held to celebrate one of her comedic specials. She invited a small group of producers, comedians, and close friends. Legend has it that at the height of the evening's revelry, she led them into a hidden library behind the main parlor. This space, lined wall to wall with shelves of comedic records, comedic scripts, and old variety show tapes, was her comedic archive, curated meticulously. She had a reel of vintage performances, including some from the earliest days of stand-up on television. As the story goes, she insisted on playing a scratchy black and white clip of her first TV appearance, as everyone crowded in, perched on plush footstools. When the clip ended, Joan gave a little bow and said, "And that's the girl I'm still chasing, hungry, hopeful, and with a bigger nose." A wave of quiet affection passed through the room. Even amid the extravagance, you sensed her humility, her longing to remain that scrappy upstart with everything to prove. Comparing the three main properties, Manhattan, Connecticut, and Los Angeles, lets us see the layers of Joan's character. The Manhattan penthouse was pure spectacle, a lavish expression of, "I've made it." It was her fortress of flamboyance, simultaneously comedic stage and personal fortress. The Connecticut farmhouse was the gentle exhalation, where the comedic pioneer could be just a mother, a friend, a gardener, someone who wore mud-splattered boots and welcomed neighbors for a slice of pie, and the Los Angeles condo signified her unstoppable forward momentum, her readiness to jump into new comedic ventures and stay plugged into Hollywood's frenetic energy. She never lost that drive. She was unstoppable after all. But there's a deeper through line. Joan sensed that the perfect home might shield her from the pain life dealt her. In the aftermath of her show's cancellation on Fox, when she felt betrayed by certain Hollywood allies, she nested in the penthouse for days on end, hardly stepping out except for dire errands. She'd said, "If you can't hide under the covers, you hide under the chandeliers." It was her comedic spin on the truth that her home was more than a possession. It was a psychological refuge, and yes, each house also had a place to memorialize Edgar. Despite their turbulent marriage and the tragic complexities, she placed a small, dedicated nook in the Manhattan penthouse with a photograph of him from their wedding, a candle that she lit every anniversary, and a comedic note he once wrote her. Quirky? Absolutely. But it was her way of melding heartbreak with humor. In Connecticut, there was an oak tree she planted in his memory, circled by a rose garden that she fiercely tended. Over the years, she'd joke about nature's unpredictability. Yet it was clear that in this garden, she found a semblance of closure, or at least acceptance. For all her comedic bravado, Joan was acutely aware of her mortality, more so after 2000, when she underwent several medical scares. She started to talk openly about the ephemeral nature of fame and design. She'd host dinners in her penthouse, gesturing at the sumptuous details and telling guests, "One day, this will all be dust. Enjoy it now and pass the caviar." Though it sounds comedic, it belied a real existential dread. She recognized that you can't hold on to youth or comedic genius forever, and so she used her home to freeze certain illusions in place, if only temporarily. By surrounding herself with the best of old-world extravagance, she might cheat time, outwit heartbreak, and, ironically, conjure a sense of timelessness in a very fleeting career. In her later years, especially once she started hosting red carpet events and starring in reality TV with Melissa, that Manhattan penthouse became something of a comedic set piece. Cameras would pan across the golden cream living room, capturing Joan's comedic commentary about fashion, life, and the state of Hollywood. Viewers gawked at the relics and the shimmering opulence, but few recognized the quiet heartbreak behind that comedic grin. This was the fortress she'd built to survive the harsh knocks of show business, the heartbreak of personal loss, and the fear that tomorrow it could all vanish. There's a story from one of her final interviews in which the reporter described being ushered into a small sitting area near a grand piano, away from the main drawing room. Through the window, the city lights stretched out in a pattern of glittering lines. Joan was visibly tired, but still witty, still unstoppable with her comedic barbs. At one point, though, she became reflective. She looked around the room, the gilded frames, the plush rug, the myriad antiques, and whispered almost to herself, "I always said I'd move, but here I am. Can't give it up. It's part of me now." The reporter wrote that it was the only moment in the entire conversation where the comedic armor dropped. Joan recognized she and her home were inextricably entwined. And indeed, that was the final truth of Joan Rivers and her iconic homes. She might have come across as flippant or attention-seeking in interviews whenever she rattled off jokes about living like Marie Antoinette minus the guillotine. But the reality was more complex. For Joan, a house wasn't merely a dwelling. It was a living self-portrait. In every curated French armchair, in every hidden comedic script, in every antique she painstakingly selected, you could glimpse the dreams and anxieties of a woman wrestling with immortality. She lived large, she laughed loud, but she also agonized over her place in the world. When Joan Rivers passed away in 2014, that flamboyant penthouse on East 62nd Street took on an almost mythical air. People wondered what secrets were left behind in those gilt-trimmed rooms. The rumored ghost stories reignited. Was Mrs. Spencer relieved or heartbroken to find her comedic companion gone? Did old comedic scripts remain hidden in taped-up boxes, or were they discovered by archivists sorting her estate? Did the diaries truly exist, sealed away in a vault, capturing the raw confessions of a comedic genius? The eventual sale of the Penthouse was a bittersweet milestone. Real estate agents described it as a masterpiece of opulent design, an architectural gem with an undeniably Joan Rivers flair. Yet you couldn't replicate the presence that once animated its halls. One agent who toured the property said she felt as if the walls were still humming with comedic energy, the echoes of late-night one-liners still swirling around the chandeliers. When it was finally emptied, the antiques and furnishings went to auctions and private collectors. Some say that a couple of the pieces turned up years later in design auctions, fetching surprising sums because they once belonged to Joan Rivers. It's funny how items that were just part of her comedic set design suddenly became relics of a cherished comedic era. Yet the intangible essence, that intangible spirit, was gone. Some might view this as a typical tale of celebrity excess, but that would miss the deeper reality. For Joan, these homes were emotional diaries, each room capturing a chapter of heartbreak or triumph. The flamboyance was part comedic show, part heartfelt attempt to chase away loneliness, and part demonstration of her unstoppable fight to be seen and remembered. She didn't simply live in these places. She infused her personality into every inch of them, as if building a fortress of identity in a world that often threatens to swallow individual voices.